It's not like tartaric. Tartaric is a very soft acid on your palate. Malic is very strong, and it doesn't take much for it to overwhelm you. So that's why most people when they say they like a dry cider, it has to have a little bit of sweetness to it. Marcus Robert, I'm a cider maker, president of Tieton Cider. We're local here in Yakima. We're apple growers first, so I'm a fourth generation orchardist. We grow about, Tieton Cider Works grows about 400 acres or so worth of apples and pears, apricots, and cherries. We have about 50 acres of some very special variety fruit, like you see here, that are very traditional in making ciders. And so we'll kind of go through this and kind of understand why this Yakima Valley, and actually there's about a 100-mile radius here between Wenatchee, Tri-Cities, and Yakima that grow 70% of all the apples grown in the U.S. And that's a huge number. It's about $2.5 to $3 billion worth of apples are grown around here, and the vast majority of them are packed right here in Yakima. So out of that, this year is a low year for us. We'll pack something like 100 million boxes, 110 million boxes this year, when usually we'll pack about close to 140 million or so, somewhere in there. Those are kind of our high years. This year's, for whatever reason, was exceptionally low.
Is there a soil type that apples like in order to make this a really good apple growing region?
Exactly. You know, we only get 7 inches of rain a year in the Yakima Valley. We're a desert. We actually have cactus and rattlesnakes and scorpions and everything else you would think a desert would grow. Sagebrush and all that kind of stuff. If there wasn't water in this valley, and the water that we get from what we call the upper Yakima Valley, we're in the lower Yakima Valley right here, looking over Zilla in this area out here, Outlook. If we weren't pulling water from some of the rivers that run through here, then this would all just be sagebrush and grass and look like a desert like it was originally. What we have here, though, and some of these slopes and some of these lower lying areas are very deep soils, typically sandy loam with a little bit of clay in them. That's what apple trees like. They like their roots to be moist, but they don't like them to be wet, and they definitely don't like to be dry. So the idea in the Yakima Valley, or the old adage, is if you can't grow apples, then you grow grapes. If you can't grow grapes, then you just put cattle in them. Because apples won't grow in gravel. Apples won't grow in cliche. They'll grow in nice sandy loam with a little bit of clay. That's what they like. We get more sunlight days here than anywhere else, I think. In the Northwest, across the North U.S., we get 300 days of sunshine here. And we're in a perfect area where we have these diurnal changes of about 30 degrees. So during the day it could be 90 degrees, and at night it's 60 degrees. During the ripening, this morning I woke up out in my ranch out in Natchez. It was 33 degrees this morning, and so it's gone up to 65 today or so out here. So we get these huge swings in temperature. We have 16 hours of daylight during the summer, so lots of time for these apples to build up that starch to when we get to this time of year, when we start cutting down those daylight hours, it starts getting colder at night. Those starches actually start turning to sugar. So the whole season is based on this fruit trying to build up as much starch as possible, and then when it feels like it's time to ripen, we don't ripen the fruit, but Mother Nature does. The trees kick in and they start going into the ripening cycle.
You know, she pointed out on the way here how some of the trees are growing in a fork now versus the way. Now, how did you do that? How did you change the way you're growing the trees?
So 100 years ago, well, even more. Well, let's start like this. All apple trees are clones. Okay. If I took a seed out of this apple, and there's 5 seed pockets in this apple, there's 5 seeds. If I planted this seed, this is called a Harrison. This is a cider apple, a very traditional American cider apple. If I took a seed out of here and put it in the ground and it grew up and produced apples, maybe, it would not be a Harrison. Okay. And each one of those seeds in this apple would make a different tree. Okay, so all apple trees are clones, and what I mean by that is how we propagate apples is we take a piece of scion wood, a stick usually, with a few buds on it, and we put it on the rootstock that we want. and trees have been grown like this for thousands of years. You know, we have an apple called a lady apple. It was documented in Roman times. It has been cloned for 1,000 years, over and over and over again, from the same germplasm. It's the same apple that it was 1,000 years ago, and they've never, you know, you can't just plant the seed and get a lady apple to come up. So, as far as, it's the rootstock that helps us do this. So we've dedicated a lot of root research, like, you know, just like in wine grapes, but there's been so much research done into apple rootstocks to get the tree to be the right size. So we've shrunk down this rootstock. So now we can, instead of planting 100 trees per acre, is what they did 100 years ago, now we plant close to a little over 2,000 trees an acre. And we put them next to each other. And all we're trying to do is grow one stem, one strong branch about 12 feet tall that and sometimes they're in a V and sometimes a V trellis, and sometimes they're on what we call a spindle or a super spindle, where it's just a wall of fruit. And that that way we can get fruit. We can grow this tree 6 feet a year. Okay, it makes it to the top of this 12-foot trellis, and then by the third year we can start getting fruit. Third, fourth year we can start getting fruit off of this and get our return on our money back. The V trellis happens to cost a little bit more. There's more capital investment in there, but it can produce up to 20% more apples per acre, 20% more tonnage per acre than just that super spindle, and definitely a lot more than the traditional 100 trees per acre system that was there 100 years ago. So that's how we get to that point. It's actually, I read an article last year that apple acreage has actually decreased over the last 5 years by 11%, but the tonnage or the production has gone up 15% because we've gotten the land more efficient. We're producing more fruit per acre than we were 10 years ago. Because some of these older orchards, like this is an old cherry orchard over here, and they wouldn't plant it like this anymore. They'd be more dense, more jungle-like, get more tonnage per acre, and sooner. Because we can grow these trees
a little bit of anatomy of the hop
faster, and they can become more precocious.
This whole thing here is called a pie.
But when we talk about the apple industry, a lot of times we talk about, now this is a very special apple for eating. This is an ambrosia, and this has gone through a breeding program that is so intense. This is actually, I think this came out of New Zealand, this variety. It's a club apple, what we call a club. It's been patented, and there's only so many people in the U.S. that can actually sell this apple. There's only so many acreage in the U.S. that can actually be planted of this apple. I picked all these apples this morning off of our ranch. This apple has gone through an intense breeding program based on perfect color, perfect size, perfect shape, perfect taste, perfect juiciness, perfect. Okay, and it's an expensive apple. This apple is like $3 a pound in this store. These other apples here I brought were to show you kind of what we're looking for cider, and it's not so much looking at it like, oh, I need a perfect apple, a perfect looking apple for cider, but these apples give us different characteristics, just like wine grapes, and that's the reason why we grow these ones. You wouldn't ever find probably a mind-blowing Thompson Seedless Reserve out there, because that grape will never make a good wine. It won't. It just won't make a great wine. And same with this ambrosia. It does not have the internal characteristics to make a good cider.
So I have a question real quick.
Yeah.
And so you try to plant as many trees in an area as you possibly can to get as much fruit.
To get as much fruit and to get that fruit off as soon as possible, because those traditional orchards would take 7 to 9 years.
But in wine, it's a little bit different. They only plant so much ton per acre.
Yeah.
And if you try to put too much on there, it affects the quality of the fruit. It doesn't happen the same way with apples?
No, it does. So these apples here, we're trying to get as much tonnage per acre. We're trying to get as much tonnage per acre on these too. But these ones, we're pumping, we're putting fertilizer to these. We're doing everything else to get
them like princesses.
Because people buy this because they look pretty.
Oh, okay.
Okay. You know, these ones, I don't care. I don't care what they look like. They look like this.
Okay.
You know, they look like this.
Okay.
So these apples. This is a Harrison. This is an American, traditional American apple. It was the cider apple in the United States before long before Prohibition, but during the temperance movement. You know, temperance movement was about telling people that, you know, if you're drinking, you know, this apple is what Eve tempted Adam with. And if you're making alcohol with it, you're on the bullet train to hell. Okay. So people went back and they cut down their apple trees.
Are you serious?
Seriously. This is Carrie Nation with her Bible, right? In the temperance movement. And she vilified the apple if you made alcohol out of it. So people, you know, they'd whisper, oh, John still has that apple tree in his backyard. You know, he's on the train to hell, you know. So they would go in their backyards and cut down their traditional apple trees that made cider, and that led to this being the #1 cider apple in the U.S. until 1978, when there was one left. And a researcher was trying to find it, and he finally found it. It was back in Harrison, New Jersey, is where he found it. And this was always called Harrison because it came from Harrison, New Jersey. And these people contacted him and said, we're going to cut this tree down in 2 weeks if you want some wood from it. And so he got some scion wood, and sure enough, 2 weeks later, that tree was gone. It was the last tree left of this. We have about 5 acres of this, which is probably the largest planting in the U.S. And it does make fantastic cider. The reason it does, it has all the characteristics we're looking for. Tannin, it has, and that's what we're talking about between wine grapes and table grapes. Wine grapes have a high amount of sugar compared to table grapes. Table grapes are around 14 to 17 bricks. Wine grapes are more like 24 bricks. Wine grapes have they have tannin, and they have high amounts of acid, so you have that balance that you get in the wine. And it's the same thing with this particular apple. Harrison has a good amount of tannins or phenolics. It has a great amount of sugar. Most apples, like this apple, we would consider this a sweet, because there's not very much acid to it, and that's what it makes it taste sweet. But when we press the juice out of it and make cider out of it, it becomes very tepid. There's no acid to balance it out, and there's definitely no tannin in it.
When you're talking about cider, are you talking about alcoholic cider or regular apple cider that you have at Halloween?
So cider is a term that is used just for alcohol. Okay? If I said anything else, I would say juice. Because the reason why in America we call cider cider is because during Prohibition, all the traditional cider mills closed down, and then all they produced was juice, but they still called it cider for whatever reason. And if you go to Treetop and you say, what's the difference between your cider and just your apple juice? So so we call everything that we make is cider, and just keep it pretty simple. So this is all alcohol. I mean, we don't produce anything that's like fresh juice or let's say pressing cider on the farm and that kind of stuff. We're making fruit wines basically. So this is a Harrison. We have Dabinet here. This is a French apple. Most of these apples are very pithy. They're not very. They don't eat very well. They have a high amount of tannin to them, so they kind of dry your mouth out. But they make fantastic juice. Kingston Black is an English apple. This is a very traditional apple that a lot of these were just found. These were basically, there's no breeding program for these. This one did have a breeding program. We'll get to that one. But there was no breeding program for these like this one. You know, they weren't. These were all chance seedlings. What that means is a seed did fall on the ground and it grew up a tree in somebody's backyard, and he tried it to make cider out of it, and it made fantastic cider. And his name happened to be Kingston, and he said, I'm going to call this Kingston Black, and I'm going to propagate this. And his neighbors went, wow, that's great cider, and they wanted pieces of that tree, and so he propagated it that way. Unlike this, where they've intentionally bred that to be perfect. They didn't intentionally do this. This just happened to pop out of the ground, and this is like a 300-400-year-old apple that has been made traditional cider over the centuries. This happens to be called a Wixon crab, and I think this is one of my favorite eating apples, actually. And this was bred to be an eating apple. It's not very old. It was bred in the 1950s, 1940s down in California. And it has a high amount of acid, very high sugar. So some years this will actually get up to close to 28 bricks. But usually this is probably, I just picked these this morning, it's probably around 22 to 24 bricks this year. These ones here, this Harrison's 15. Dabinet's around 15, Kingston Black's more like 13. Most of your eating apples like this are lower, like 12, because it has little amount of acid in it. You don't need to get much sugar in food to balance out no acid. So all they're trying to do is get as much sugar development in that apple. This has acid. This has a high amount of sugar, and also a little bit of tannin to it. My kids actually love eating these because it's so intense. It's like eating, like a Cab Franc. It's like eating some of these wine grapes out there that have a huge amount of organoleptic pieces to it.
So how many bricks inside?
So this one today is probably about 22 bricks. This Wixon, and the Kingston Black is, it's probably like 13, 14. Davenet's 15. Harrison's 15. Your Honeycrisp apple that you think about being so sweet, so it's really not. It doesn't have that much bricks. What it doesn't have is a lot of acid to balance out the bricks or give you that acid flavor to it. So, and that kind of leads us into these varieties of apples. This is what we would call a sweet, okay, because it has no tannin to it. And this Davenet is a bittersweet. This is a sweet apple. It's low acid, but it actually has tannin, and that's what we call bitter. So this Davenet is a bittersweet. Kingston Black is a bitter sharp. So what that means, it has acid and it has tannin. It doesn't really matter about how much sugar it has. It matters how much acid and how much tannin it has. So you have bittersweet and bitter sharps. And then if I had, let's say, a Granny Smith here, that we would just consider that a sharp because it has really no tannin, but it has quite a bit of acid to it. And I actually have, if you'd like to try, I have some a single varietal here. We're starting to come out with single varietals. A lot of people think of cider as like, well, cider is just made out of whatever. Apples are apples are apples, and it's really not true. Okay, so I have a single varietal. It's called the Ashmead Kernel. Ashmead's Kernel. It's an English apple, a dual-purpose apple actually when it was originally found. So dual-purpose means they can eat it, and then they can also make cider out of it. Very intense acids to it. So it's a little. So we've leveled that out with a little bit of residual sugar, and then it also has some very intense kind of, to me, more like watermelon aroma, that sort of thing to it. So each of these apples have different kind of phenolic compounds that give you different kinds of aromas. Davenet is very nutty. It has like almost like a hazelnut nose to it. Kingston Black is much more aptly. And some of these, since I just picked them this morning, that one's giving off, it's a little waxy. That one's giving off a little aroma. It's a very good aroma apple, but also something you can blend out with a sweeter apple because it can be kind of acid intense. This one is just a single varietal. You guys want to try a little bit? I did bring some cider for dinner, and it's our Cidermaker's Reserve. I named it after, it's my namesake, so it's going to be good. It's a blend of. It's a blend of.
You want me to pass those out?
Oh, that'd be great. It's a blend of some heritage apples like this Kingston or like this Ashmead Kernel, and it's also a blend of some of these bittersweet and bitter sharp apples. Now that a lot of people, you can only really buy about a dozen different apples in the grocery store.
So perfumey and aromatic.
Yeah, you can only buy about a dozen different apples in the grocery store, and that's. And actually 50 years ago, or even 30 years ago, it was even less. There was 3 apples. There was a green apple, there was a red apple, and there was a yellow apple, right?
What's the, is this a blend or which apple is this?
This is a single varietal. It's called Ashmead's Kernel.
Made from which one of those apples?
I don't have Ashmead's Kernel up here. Yeah, it's a different apple than what we have here.
So what made you decide to go into making cider as opposed to just selling your apple? Just more profitable?
Well, we didn't even know, here's the thing, we wouldn't even be making cider if we weren't growers. We put in the orchard before we even had a cider. And somebody came to us and said, hey, there's this new thing coming up, there's going to be cider in the U.S. And we said, okay, we'll try this out. We planted these ones. We planted these varieties here. We already had these commercial varieties on that 400 acres that we were selling to, we grow, 80% of our acreage is organic. We do a lot of organic that way. And these will be transitioning into organic here. Well, actually, they're doing it this year. But that's the whole reason why we got into it. We're growers first. The reason I got into it particularly is I also own a winery. I've been a winemaker for about 20 years. And so it made sense to me. So because I know everything from the horticulture side and the enology side to produce
This
these
is
ciders.
beautiful.
Now, what's the alcohol content?
The alcohol content on this one is about 7.4, something like that. Yeah.
I'm sorry, how long have you been making cider?
Been making cider for about 10 years. Yeah.
I feel like now cider has reached such a thing. There's like cidery bars. I'm from DC. Like, that's a thing now. Yeah, it's really popular.
Yeah. Well, it's becoming more and more popular as people kind of understand what's going on.
Yeah.
In the last couple years, Angry Orchard came out in 2011. They took over like 50% market share overnight. But in this last year, in regions like ours here in the Northwest, where we have so much in the food scene, we have so much local produce and local beef and local everything, that their market share has actually shrunk in the Northwest by 35%. It has, Northwest is the only region in the U.S. where small craft cideries like us, regional cideries, outsell the big brands. Because people are used to just going down to the local bar. There's 300 breweries in Seattle. There's literally, you can just walk down the street and go, instead of going to a pub, you just go to your favorite brew bar, basically. So we're kind of in a perfect area here as far as the market is concerned. Prime area just to sell that. We not only have all the infrastructure here and all the raw product and the growing conditions, but we also have the consumers here that want it. And that's really important too. I don't have to ship my stuff all the way across the country to another market to get it to sell. It sells here.
Do you press the apple the same way you press the grape? You can use the same equipment? Or?
You can, but apples have to be ground down to a pulp, and we use what we call a belt press. It's a continuous press. We do have a bladder press we use if we do some kind of maceration. We'll put it in the bladder press, but we have a belt press which just apples, we grind the apples, they fall onto a belt, and there's two perforated belts, and as the belt winds around a bunch of drums, it squeezes the juice out, and then the apples get scraped off, and we send that down the lower valley here to cattle farm and mix it with silage and feed their cattle. Very high in fiber, not very high in nitrogen, but it's very high in fiber.
So how do you get the color through the maceration process?
This color? No, that just comes out of the apple.
That's just the color of the apple.
That's just the color of the juice that comes
The
out of
juice.
Yeah.
Okay, that's amazing. So do you have that bottle?
This is only on draft. And that's why I have 2 growlers of it today. No bottles, yeah.
All right.
Okay, so what makes it? You said it's the reserve, right?
This is Ashmead's kernel. What you can sample over there at dinner, we're going to have a reserve, and it's about the same.
I'm just trying to
dark
understand
straw
what's the
color.
reserve. What makes it a reserve?
So the reserve. So what we did with the reserve is we blended some heirloom apples like this. This is considered an heirloom, and then some of these bittersweet, bitter sharps, and then we aged that in barrel for a couple years. And this is actually a 2015 vintage that you can have tonight. And that's why we're doing it as a reserve.
Does it like French oak? Does it like American oak? Hungarian oak?
These are actually used bourbon barrels.
Oh, that's even better, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that too. Yeah.
And so they were in bourbon barrels for a few years.
Okay.
They took up, and it just gives it another layer of complexity. That's one thing we can do in the cider that wine is, maybe the consumers in wine don't want.
Correct.
And the consumers in cider are like, yeah, put hops in there and put that in there.
Put
I want whatever you want to put in there. I'm not so, I came from the wine industry, and I'm not so inclined to put, I'm not going to make a banana, chipotle, pineapple cider. That's not me. And that's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to show off what we can do in this valley to people everywhere. And so we don't grow bananas here, or ginger, or all that kind of stuff. But a lot of that's fine. If consumers want it, they can buy it.
And what's the reserve?